Hi, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to part 2 of our look at Infinite Crisis and the end of an era in my Essential Issues retrospective DC Comics series. I'll explain that at the end, but yes, this is Essential Issues, where I talk about my favorite DC comics of the past that are still affordably available today, blabbing about why they are special to me and what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, this series does freely contain spoilers, but I think even spoiled, the stories I feature are still well worth reading. When we left off last time, villains were revealed and things were primed to kick into high gear. If you haven't watched or listened to part 1 of my look at Infinite Crisis, be sure to do that at youtube.com/ChristianGeekCentral before continuing here. That said, let's look at issues 4 through 7 of DC Comics Infinite Crisis. So as issue 4 begins, a group of villains drops a villain named Chemo, who's basically made of these horribly radioactive chemicals. They drop him like a nuke onto Bloodhaven, which is the city that I want to say is like a sister city to Gotham or a suburb of Gotham or something that Nightwing is kind of the Batman of. And this villain Chemo gets dropped in the middle of it and goes off like a nuke and turns all of Bloodhaven into an irradiated wasteland, and there are no projected survivors. In part, I think maybe an editorial status quo change they wanted to bring about, but I think also just adding to the absolute chaos and the low point, the dark low point that the DC universe is in. And observing this destruction, Alex Luthor comments, like Sodom and Gomorrah, Bloodhaven falls. Now, there's some stuff going on in the writing with Alex Luthor that I don't know how much of it is just cliche and how much of it is some kind of commentary. I'd really have to get into Jeff Johns' head to know. But there's a couple comments, couple moments that, I don't know if coincidentally or not, have him expressing some ideas associated with Christianity. Here, this is, not just Christianity, but also Judaism. I don't know that I've ever heard someone in fiction make a comparison to something going on to Sodom and Gomorrah, and that character is not an evil, self-righteous hypocrite. And yet, as hard as it is to read that account, the judgment, the wrath on Sodom and Gomorrah was just and very necessary. There was horrible, horrible stuff going on. But perhaps the truthful takeaway from this is that we as humans should not be quick to pronounce that such and such place, such and such person or whatever deserves the wrath of God, comparing them to, Sodom and Gomorrah. The Apostle Paul said, what have I to do with judging outsiders? Is it not those inside the church that we are to judge? And so I think we do need to be careful as Christians, even as we're longing for God to come and bring about judgment, bring an end to this dark era of the world that we live in, even as we're longing for those things, to just be careful in how we express that longing and be willing for God's judgment to start at our doorstep. And that is not where Alex Luthor is at. He has positioned himself, as he says, he says, we're doing what we survived to do. We're erasing everything that's bad, completely unaware and unacknowledging of his own evil. Anyway, at this point, Superboy Prime and Alex Luthor have captured Kara, have captured Power Girl, and this is where the villain monologuing begins as Alex explains how they've arrived at this point, what they've been doing behind the scenes. They have been manipulating events in the DC Universe behind the scenes long before Golden Age Superman decided to intervene. Alexander Luthor was using a hologram to impersonate Lex Luthor and gathering these villains around himself so that he could get the right ones that had some kind of a frequency connection to previous Earths in the multiverse, because they needed a representative sample from all these different parallel Earths in order to power this big death machine that's going to destroy reality and remake it the way Alex Luthor wants it to be. So that's what's going on behind the whole society of supervillains that the fake Luthor, Alex Luthor, has been creating. And there's other stuff he was responsible for, too, as far as what was going on with the Spectre going kind of crazy, and with OMAC. Superboy was, pushing planets around to cause the Ran-Thanagar War. Alexander Luthor says, all in our crusade for finding a new Earth. And that's really the second time that he uses language that's associated in some way, in this sense historically, post-biblically, but still historically associated with Christianity, unfortunately, and that's the Crusades. So it does make me wonder what's the conscious or subconscious inspiration for the treatment of this character as Geoff Johns is writing it. But there is an important detail that comes out of this monologuing. Kara's like, oh, so that, you were behind it all. That explains why Wonder Woman killed Maxwell Lord, why Batman became so paranoid, why Superman, da-da-da-da-da. And Alexander Luthor says, no, actually, they did those parts themselves. That's the real tragedy of this all, is that this is a messed up world that has nothing to do with me and my interference. The third time that Alexander Luthor says something that I think is at least in line to some degree with Christian thinking is when Golden Age Superman returns from visiting Batman, reports on what that exchange was like, and says, Alexander, he did make a good point when I was talking to him. Not everyone is a worse person on this Earth. Some, like Richard Grayson, Nightwing, are as good and as strong as the ones we knew. He's even grown beyond his role as Robin. To which Alexander Luthor replies, Grayson is an exception to the rule, but only for now. In time, he would become corrupted like the others. And the reason I think that syncs up with Christian teaching is that the Bible teaches that, we are all, apart from God, we are all lost. The human heart is deceitful above all things. None does good. No one seeks after God. These are all ideas that Scripture affirms. And so, in a sense at least, I would be on board with Alexander Luthor saying that, Dick Grayson, by, convenient human comparative standards, is a really good stand-up guy. But like all of us, he has sin, he has corruption. Now, maybe Alexander Luthor is saying that he would ultimately become a villain and all these kinds of horrible things, and I'm not necessarily saying I would conclude that. But what seems to be the case here is that the villain is being portrayed as someone who does not have optimism that the goodness of humanity will ultimately win out in human history. The villainous view is that humans cannot ultimately save themselves and bring about utopia. And I think what we're meant to interpret as the good view is the humanist view, that humans ultimately will, like Gene Roddenberry predicted, would put aside our differences somehow magically at some point. I don't know how you do that, Gene, but we'll put aside our differences and we will pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and somehow create utopia. Those, I think, are the two ideologies in conflict here. I could be wrong. Again, it's one of the things that's so interesting about comic books and also frustrating at the same time is they're constantly playing with these moral ideas, these very strong moral worldview and philosophical ideas. But it's a very rare thing for a creator in any type of entertainment medium, and certainly in comics as well, to come out and put all their cards on the table and say, this is my worldview, this is the worldview that I am promoting in my work. And these are the worldviews that I am against and that I'm trying to criticize in my work. So I'm not pronouncing, what definitely Geoff Johns is doing here, but it's interesting. Meanwhile, Superboy Prime was given permission by Alexander Luthor to go and confront the Superboy of the DC Universe. So he goes to the Kent farm, he sees Ma and Pa Kent, is very polite with them, but things very quickly get nasty between Superboy Prime and Connor Kent, the clone that's blending both Superman and Lex Luthor's DNA, but who's trying to be a hero. Superboy Prime continues to show these kind of immature personality traits, and it very predictably comes to blows between he and Connor Kent. And Connor Kent is really outmatched. I mean, as I said just a moment ago, Superboy Prime was pushing planets around. I'm not even sure the Superman of the DC Universe at this point was that strong. So Krypto, the Superdog, comes onto the scene and tries to help defend Connor. And Superboy Prime just starts beating the crap out of Krypto. Meanwhile, now Batman is sharing with Nightwing what he learned from the surveillance footage of the JLA headquarters, that Superboy Prime was responsible for the attack on the headquarters, and that the Golden Age Superman seems to be part of, from Batman's perspective, some kind of horrible scheme, along with some kind of Luthor. And Batman calls upon Nightwing because he knows that Nightwing is still on good terms, that people all over the superhero community trust and respect him, and that's just not where Batman is right now. There's so much distrust and animosity between Batman and the rest of the superhero community. So Nightwing is springing into action to help Bruce, and yet Bruce is still haunted by the conversation he had with the Golden Age Superman. He knows he's gone down a dark path, and there's this really kind of subtle but beautiful and tender moment before Dick leaves. Bruce says, basically, wait a minute, Dick, and he says, yeah? And Bruce says, the early years, I've forgotten if they were good for you, weren't they? So I just love how this is written because it's so understated. He clearly loves Dick Grayson like a son. In the wake of his conversation with Golden Age Superman, he's wondering how dark a path he has gone down, how many problems he's caused, how many people he's damaged. Was this man, who I love like a son, one of those? Did he destroy this young man's life? And this moves me in a new way as a dad, as I think about my sons. In just a handful of years, they'll be old enough to have more perspective on how they were raised. And so I'm hopeful about this kind of exchange in the future with my boys, but also fearful at the same time. As you look back on those years, of those years that I was raising you, what do you think of those years? Dick Grayson answers with a smile on his face, they were the best. So a really nice character moment there. Always appreciate Jeff Johns giving time for little things like this. But then we get back to the action, of course, and Connor Kent is in huge trouble, way overmatched, but battered and bleeding. He's got a smile on his face and reveals a Titans communicator in his palm that he has activated. And current members of the Teen Titans and a bunch of teams and heroes that they're associated with have all showed up to help defend Connor and take on Superboy Prime. We cut away briefly. Now, normally I haven't been commenting on every little cutaway scene. There's a bunch of little cutaway things that are kind of editorial, setting up different things in DC continuity. One of those things here is setting up the new host of the Spectre. These two investigators are looking at a dead body as they're talking about the case, and they say about this guy, poor Vic, was his name. He says, poor Vic had a wife, 2 kids. Things like this happen. The world goes crazy. It makes you wonder if there's a God. And if there is a God, what did we do to piss him off so much? So appropriate types of dialogue for setting up the origin of the new Spectre. But I mean, again, comics are always playing with these kinds of things. And I forget sometimes just how much they're playing with these major worldview ideas. It's so easy, certainly for non-Christians, but for us as Christians as well, to look at the mess in our world and ask the question, why? And then try to figure it out, and sometimes make assumptions that are incorrect about the reason for God allowing or bringing about certain things. But nevertheless, that's something that's very common to all of us. So we cut back to the Superboy Prime's fight with maybe an eighth of the DC hero community at this point. And he's just like so frustrated that this is happening, and he is kind of cutting loose, or rather not holding back, just because he doesn't have the experience to know how to hold back, and ends up like punching people's heads off. I mean, the first time he does that, there's tears in his eyes. He's shocked and horrified. He says, I didn't mean to do that. He's got blood all over his hands, tears streaming down his face. The heroes are all the more determined to put him down, which makes him cut loose even more. He's just blowing through characters, rips one dude's arm off, and in the midst of all that, he's blaming them, saying, you're ruining everything. Again, with tears in his eyes, says, you're ruining me. It's a really interesting lack of maturity here that I think can soberingly, if we're willing, be a good springboard for reflection on our part as believers. We can look at this world and see how dark and just corrupted and messed up it is. And as we are being hurt by it all, find ourselves reacting in a way that hurts other people in horrible ways that we're not even willing to recognize are our fault. That certainly the pains and hurts and evils of this world can provide motivation, a very understandable motivation for us to lash out or to be insensitive. But nevertheless, we are not cause and effect machines. I mean, we as believers know that. We believe in free will, whereas like atheism has to conclude that, you know, logically speaking, free will doesn't truly exist. But we know we are not cause and effect machines. And so it's important for us to recognize that even when we are being wounded, the way we respond to those hurts, those wounds, those evils is ultimately our responsibility. Well, eventually 3 generations of Flashes, Jay Garrick, Wally West, and Bart Allen, all together grab Superboy Prime and endeavor to pull him into the Speed Force just so that he'll get absorbed into that and lost in that forever. In the process of doing that, there's definitely some kind of editorial mandate being carried out here as Wally West starts getting pulled, not into the Speed Force, but somewhere else, and somehow he has the time to talk about it. And Linda, his wife, and their twin kids become aware of this. He kind of makes an appearance to them. Linda's like, Wally, what's going on? What's wrong? He's basically like, I'm getting pulled away. I can't stop it. She's like, are you going to the Speed Force? He's like, no, not the Speed Force, I don't think. Somewhere else. And he's thinking this is goodbye, but she says, no, wherever you're going, your family's coming with you. And it feels like DC editorial was like, we don't really know what to do with Wally West. He's married, he's got 2 kids. We just got to get him all out of there. And so they do. They all get whisked off to who knows where or when. Meanwhile, Bart Allen, with the help of Barry Allen, who, remember, was still lost to the Speed Force at this time in DC Publishing. He was presumed dead, but he makes an appearance here, coming out, emerging from the Speed Force to help Bart finish the job in getting Superboy Prime to be absorbed into the Speed Force. In all of that, Bart disappears. We don't know what happened to him, but we do see Jay Garrick, who ran out of steam, couldn't keep up with the other speedsters, and one of his teammates comes up to the Golden Age Flash and says, Jay, you okay? And Jay says, the Speed Force, it's gone. So we are left with Jay Garrick being powerless. This is actually the second time I can recall that one of these big crossover events has tried to leave Jay Garrick without super speed, and it never sticks. And honestly, I'm grateful for that. After this, for a while, Bart Allen aged up, became the Flash or something, had a brief run that I really did not connect with at all. But yeah, you know, another big Crisis crossover event and another major status quo change with the Flash. Well, anyway, Alexander Luthor succeeds in using his evil machine to recreate Earth 2 or something like it, and the Golden Age Superman and the dying Golden Age Lois Lane are both instantly transported there. And with a big smile on Superman's face, he says, we're here, Lois, we're home. Hey, speaking of more religion talk, there's a character, I believe his name is Ragman, who's in a conversation with Mr. Terrific, who's pretty outspoken as an atheist in the JSA series. And a bunch of heroes are meeting at this, I guess for some reason, gathering at a cathedral, having some kind of midnight mass before they all go out and assume they're going to die in some horrible conflict or whatever. And Mr. Terrific mentions that he's an atheist. And the other guy says, atheist? I thought Mr. Terrific was supposed to be the smartest man in the world. Terrific says, 3rd smartest, actually. And the other guy says, and you still don't believe in a god? Wasn't the Spectre a member of the Justice Society? Terrific says, before my time. Well, actually, that's not true. The Spectre is a major part of Michael Holt's origin story as Mr. Terrific, so that really seems like a weird dodge or something. Other guy says, what about guys like Deadman and Zariel, and my own suit is made up of corrupted souls? Terrific says, a unique energy that could quantify as a telepathic discharge upon death. And as a reader, I'm not sure what we're supposed to think. I mean, like, it does really, really seem like he is living in some kind of crazy denial. And yet maybe there are some atheists who read this and, like, totally that's how they, justify it and make it work in their mind. Or maybe they just don't care because it's comic books. I mean, that's how I feel a lot of the times. At the end of the day, I'm interested in what writers are saying, but I'm like, okay, well, it's not going to line up with my worldview. But this is certainly something that I've, wondered as a reader before I first read this story. I was like, how is he an atheist? Or at least, how is he a naturalist? Anyway, other guy says, so you don't believe in anything? You don't have any faith? And then we get a very typical kind of like substitution or counterfeit faith that's presented in fiction a lot. Terrific response, of course I do, Ragman. Got faith in my team. What is it? Got faith in other people. And that's borne out even more when Zariel, who has very been strongly associated with Judeo-Christian teaching in the comics up to this point. Admittedly, he's a fallen angel, so I guess we shouldn't expect his theology to always be spot on. But I still think it's interesting. He's kind of up in front of the church giving a sermon in what looks like a really old-school, hardcore Catholic-looking cathedral. He says, we ask you, Lord, to take care of those that have already fallen. We ask you to watch over those who have been injured and those that are missing. We look to you to give us the strength we will need for the trials that surely lie ahead. And above all, so this is the biggest thing that's going to be emphasized, most important point. And above all, we offer our faith in each other and in a better tomorrow. Oh, what? So, I mean, it's just another one of those times where it's like it seems like the only kind of likable theist or likable pseudo-Christian character is just that, a pseudo-Christian. Their theology and doctrine is just kind of really askew from what the Bible teaches. From a character standpoint, what this character should be saying is, above all, we, or if he doesn't want to say we, say I, or those of us who know you, offer our faith in you and trust that even if this doesn't work out the way we would want it to right now, that you will be the victor in the end, that you will have and provide ultimate rescue for us in the end. Anyway, I know I'm expecting too much, but I guess I would just rather that characters like this that are supposedly coming from a particular religious perspective, whether that's Jewish or Christian in the case of Zariel, that they would write them in line with at least what those two faiths have in common. And if they don't want to do that, to just not write scenes with them as the mouthpiece for, what that character believes. So, yeah, weird scene. But then, of course, he ends with the traditional trappings of Christianity. He says, Lord, hear our prayer. To which the congregants are supposed to reply, of course, Lord, hear our prayer. I think that's more of a Catholic thing. I've never been at a church that does that. Catholic or like deeply liturgical church. So we cut back to Golden Age Clark and Lois. It seems that as he hoped, this Earth 2 being brought back would revive Lois and restore her life to her, and she wouldn't be dying anymore, but that is not the case. She grows weak and falls. He cradles her in his arms in her last moments, and she dies. The Earth 1 Superman overhears this, comes to see, didn't know where they were, but heard Golden Age Superman just scream out in grief and agony over Lois's death, so that alerts Earth 1 Superman to where he's at. He comes on the scene, trying to see if he can help, but in a rage, Golden Age Superman assumes that it's the corruption of Earth 1 that is somehow continued to infect Lois and is responsible for her death, and he just takes it out on Earth 1 Superman. I mean, come on, we knew this was coming. Gotta have a big old fist fight between the two Supermen. Wonder Woman, though, comes on the scene, tries to bring some calm to the situation, and it provides a window for Earth 1 Superman to point something very important out to the Golden Age Superman, who just views his Earth as the perfect Earth that needs to be restored. Earth 1 Superman says, listen, if you're from this Earth, it can't be perfect because a perfect Earth doesn't need a Superman. And again, I wonder, as I've mentioned before, if there's some kind of an intended conversation on a meta level going on between DC editorial and those who maybe didn't like identity crisis and how dark it took the DC Universe, among other things, taking the DC Universe really dark. This almost could be seen, I don't know if it's the case or not, but it almost could be seen as this meta commentary saying, listen, you guys, you readers have been complaining that the universe has gotten too dark. You want to go back to this brighter, simpler time, but ultimately, if the world is that bright, does it really need superheroes? We're trying to create a world that is dark and that will therefore need superheroes and will experience that the gratification of seeing heroes make a difference in a dark world. Now, that's a ton of speculation on my part. I'm putting a lot of potential words into the mouths of the DC editors. But I will say again that that is one reason I appreciate darkness being in my superhero worlds. Is because presumably, even if it doesn't happen right away, even if it takes too long in the view of other readers, a dark world does allow for the opportunity for rescue to be represented in that story. And that is a beautiful thing that I'd like to see in my stories. And when the world is darker, then the victory and the rescue is that much brighter by contrast and satisfying to me as a result. And Golden Age Superman realizes that, that what Earth 1 Superman said is true. And that he must have made a mistake in his thinking at some point. Well, in the midst of chaos erupting all around the world and all these countless parallel Earths returning and just mucking things up, the Flash emerges from wherever he came from. It's not clear who this is. I believe it's Bart Allen at this point, wearing the regular Flash costume for some reason, for reasons they get into at another time. But he shows up and reports, holy crap, he's coming, he's coming. We couldn't hold on to him. Superboy Prime is coming back. And we see a shot of Superboy Prime emerging from the multiverse or the Speed Force or wherever. Now he's wearing some kind of what looks like modified anti-Monitor armor and is looking more evil and angry than ever. So then we come to issue number 6, and Batman is leading a group of heroes, including the new Blue Beetle, who apparently is the only one that is going to be capable of seeing the Brother Eye satellite that is controlling all of the OMACs, which now at this point in the story we've learned was upgraded in some way by Alex Luthor, the true mastermind behind all of the stuff going on, and he is using OMAC's super intelligence upgradedness to create, it's a combination of OMAC data processing, like the Brother Eye OMAC data processing, and the big multiversal tower that Alex Luthor has set up that's providing the means. Combining those two somehow is allowing Alex Luthor to create or realize in some way all of these parallel reality Earths, and he's going to pick and choose from among them, maybe mix them together to create his ideal perfect world. So the heroes know that Brother Eye is a major part of what's causing problems. They know he needs to be shut down. Blue Beetle, the new Blue Beetle, is the only one that can help them find Brother Eye, and in fact, he does. Meanwhile, we cut back to Golden Age Superman, Earth 1 Superman, and Wonder Woman, who has joined them. And Superman, who has now realized he's made a horrible mistake, kind of catches up Superman and Wonder Woman on Alex Luthor's plan. At this point, all the multiple reality Earths he's creating are unstable the more of them there are, and they need to be brought back and unified into one Earth again. If that doesn't happen, they'll all be destroyed. I don't think I'll have much to say compared to other issues about issue 6, because a lot of it is just presenting a who's who of heroes mostly, and also villains across the DC universe. They're all kind of trying to contribute to the resolution of this multiversal problem, but it's all a bit chaotic and unclear as to how anybody is really being helpful apart from a few key players. So this issue is where it kind of falls back even more into the standard crossover type story that's just cramming a ton of characters in there, maybe trying to give everyone, new readers a sample platter of the DC universe. I don't really know why they go this route, or maybe just to try and create a sense of scale by having so many characters in the DC universe all in the same story. I don't know. But it doesn't really work for me, and my eyes kind of start to glaze over for parts of the story at this point. The next major story beat involves a group of heroes rescuing the kind of sample characters from various key parallel Earths who had been hooked up to the big golden Crisis on Infinite Earths machine that Alex was using to create multiple realities. So the people, the characters that were strapped to that device, this group of heroes freed. But Alex says that, none of those characters are needed alive anymore at this point. So it seems that in some way, all the damage that was going to be done by Alex Luthor's big machine has already been done. And on top of that, Superboy observes and warns a couple other heroes that Superboy Prime is back on Earth-1. And we get another reminder of Superboy Prime's power levels as he faces off with Black Adam, who's like the nemesis and equal in power to Shazam, as he's known now, or as I'll always think of him, Captain Marvel. At first, it seems like Black Adam really has the advantage. His powers are magical in their source, and as we, comic fans all know, Superman does have a particular weakness to magic. Superboy Prime, as he's getting pummeled by Black Adam, is saying, "Oh, the magic, it hurts!" But then he stops all that reeling backward from these blows and suddenly just turns with a menacing smile and says, "Actually, it tickles." I actually don't like this little bit of dialogue. It is on a meta level referring to, I believe, a classic cover of Action Comics or a Superman comic. Oh, here we go. It looks like Superman number 32, really old classic comic. I don't even know the story or what was going on, but on the cover, Superman's being pummeled with lightning bolts, and he just smiles and says, "It tickles." I'm not really a big fan of that kind of meta reference type of writing. There's another moment in issue 6 here where Green Arrow observes that he and Batman have, kind of wound up being teamed up together, and he says, "Brave and the Bold, huh? Got me all misty." To my knowledge, Brave and the Bold was just the name of a comic book series that teamed up various members of the DC Universe, not an actual team that these characters would have heard of. And so why he says Brave and the Bold here doesn't make any sense strictly within the continuity of the DC Universe. I love Jeff Johns, but every once in a while he'll get just a little bit nostalgic and lean into it to the point of, it being kind of a meta writing, and I'm not really into that. Anyway, Superboy Prime basically knocks Black Adam into orbit so far away from the area that they're in, from the tower that Alex Luthor created, that he automatically kind of reconnected with the frequency of his home parallel reality. And at this point, Superboy Prime asks Alex Luthor, "Why can't I be transported to my Earth like them? Why can't I go home?" And Alex says, "I'd theorize somehow you've changed at your very core, Superboy." Which is interesting that his character became so warped that he's no longer compatible with his home reality. And then in passing, we get this explanation for the armor that Superboy Prime is wearing. He designed it after the Anti-Monitor's harness on the tower. That's why it looks like kind of like the Anti-Monitor was wearing. And it's an energy collector that supercharges him with yellow sunlight. And in the next panel, we learn that actually, although he was away fairly briefly, just for a few pages of reader's time, he was in the Speed Force for years, and the Flashes somehow kept him imprisoned under red sunlight. And him being kind of trapped for years in this other place, I believe that is the explanation for why he was aged up a little bit, which you wouldn't notice necessarily from the art. But if memory serves, for a little while they were calling him Superman Prime, or trying to do that, go that route with this character, because I believe there were some rights disputes with the Siegel or Schuster family over the character Superboy, and the DC was at risk of losing the rights to publish stories about anyone called Superboy. So that might have influenced aging him up a little bit. Well, we cut back to Batman and his team getting onto the Brother Eye satellite, and they have been successful in basically dislodging it from orbit, so that it will either self-destruct or at least no longer be capable of serving its function for Alex Luthor. And there's a moment right before Brother Eye loses, where he's talking to Batman and says, "Why are you doing this to me, Creator? You can trust me to do what is right. You cannot trust them. You can never trust them again after all they have done." This is a pivotal moment because Batman has been distrustful toward the hero community, and in particular the heroes that were part of removing that slice of his memory in the Identity Crisis storyline. Brother Eye is determined to take Batman down with him amidst all the destruction going on, but just at that moment, Green Lantern Hal Jordan bursts through the wall, and Hal Jordan specifically and Batman have been at odds for a while. So if Batman is going to be antagonistic toward any other hero, it's going to be Hal Jordan. And yet, right on the heels of Brother Eye saying, you can't trust any of those heroes ever again. You can't trust them after all that they've done. But he sees Hal Jordan, who is holding out his hand to Bruce, and Batman says, "I'll take my chances," and grabs his hand. So one significant example of how this story seems to be a response to the fallout of Identity Crisis and trying to bring about some healing maybe to the DC universe. Then we cut back to Superboy Connor Kent in a knockdown, drag-out, epic fight with Superboy Prime. And, Connor is way outmatched, as I mentioned earlier. And yet he is pushing himself beyond his limits to take this maniac down. And ultimately he gives everything that he has. In one final attack, he slams into Superboy Prime. The two of them go backward into the giant multiversal tower, which then explodes. And we get a big splash page showing all these crystal shards of kind of the Crystal Palace that Alex had been operating from. All of them have different reflections of various elements of parallel Earths. We see a big trail of parallel Earths that seem to be combining together again. And at the bottom of this page, we see one Earth with the description text simply labeling it New Earth. What has been done, what continuities are now canon at this point, what the new status quo is, all of that is up in the air, but this is the moment where the DC Universe has again had its continuity rebooted. But despite all of that, Connor Kent doesn't fare so well. Wonder Girl, his girlfriend at the time in this story, discovers him under the wreckage of the tower, and he is battered and broken and bleeding. And in this moment, he kind of says that we all forgot, meaning we forgot what it is to really be heroes. And in his dying moment says, don't let them forget again. So again, meant to be a very poignant moment, and I believe also meant to represent a course correction. DC, in essence, at least partially saying, yes, things did get too dark, and we must never do that again. And that's the end of Connor Kent, Superboy. I mean, at least for now. We will see him again someday. But this also seemed to be possibly an editorial move related to the controversy going on surrounding the rights of the name Superboy at this time. But whatever the reasoning, they do give it a nice dramatic beat. Well, finally, then, we get to issue 7, which just has a lot of chaotic action going on as the villains all over the world are just wreaking havoc. They've all been freed by the Society of Supervillains from their various prisons and are just destroying cities all over the place. And Superboy Prime, at the end of his rope, basically says, no, this has all gone wrong. Things were so much better when I was the only hero in, my universe, because he came from a planet where he was the only superhero on that planet. And so he resolves to fly through Oa, which is at the center of the DC universe. He's going to fly right through it. He says, at light speed, there will be a new Big Bang. Everything will restart. And he can do it. I mean, he is old school powerful, like the Golden Age Superman was in his prime. Crazy amounts of powerful. He can fly through this planet at light speed. You believe it, and you believe that will start a Big Bang and that he will single-handedly be able to destroy the universe. Meanwhile, Alex Luthor, still alive, still determined to win or to continue enacting his plan in some way, He has just given what looks like might be a fatal blow to Nightwing, who is lying battered and bloody at Batman's feet. In a rage, Batman picks up a gun nearby in the rubble, points it right at Alex Luthor's head, cocks the gun, prepares to fire, and then a quiet voice over his shoulder simply says, "Bruce." And it's Wonder Woman, quietly approaching amidst all the rubble. She slowly walks up, draws out her sword, holds it in front of her as if ready to strike, but then lets her blade fall to the ground where it breaks. Now, I don't know how it could possibly break, just falling to the ground, but clearly they're going for a dramatic moment here, where even Wonder Woman, who at this point was known famously for having killed Maxwell Lord, looking like she was going to do the same thing to Alex Luthor, drops her blade and just simply says, "It's not worth it." And angry but still relenting, Batman says, "I know." And he drops the gun as well. But I think sensing that readers would want some kind of catharsis when it comes to Alex Luthor, they choose this moment to have a bunch of, I guess, other explosive rubble fall from the sky and land right on top of him. So I think the writers here are caught in that tension that we feel as well, where we are crying out for this ultimate justice. We recognize that our systems of justice ultimately fall short. There is no life imprisonment, no death sentence that can truly bring about justice in some cases. It's not truly equal to what that criminal perhaps has done, horrifically, many, many times. But at the same time, there's this recognition that it's not our place to bring about ultimate justice. We want to see ultimate justice. It's not our place to bring about ultimate justice. What do? Well, I guess we have random rocks fall on people. We're not... It's not like they're going to introduce God into the story. But that's just one more way that I constantly see these very fundamental human issues of morality and purpose and justice playing out in the pages of comic books. Meanwhile, playing out in space, both of the Supermen have grabbed Superboy. He was slowed down briefly by some Green Lanterns on his trek to Oa, allowing these two Supermen to catch up to him. Superboy Prime is just distracted enough that he doesn't recognize the significance of where the Supermen are directing him, namely, directly through, from one side out the other, a red sun. At least I think it's supposed to be a red sun. I'm honestly not sure. At least it's a normal sun, which significantly burns off the energy-collecting armor that Superboy Prime had been using, that really contributed to a lot of his overpowered state. That said, he's still immensely powerful, so much that on the planet they have crashed down onto, he is just pounding into Golden Age Superman's face. There is blood spattering everywhere. You just know this does not look good at all for the original Man of Steel. Earth 1 Superman intervenes, but then he gets the full attention of Superboy Prime and is not faring much better. Superboy Prime is screaming at him in rage, going on and on about how he's the only one who knows how to make things right. He's going to be the greatest hero, and he says to Superman, "When you're gone, I will be Superman." And then amidst delivering blows, Earth 1 Superman kind of delivers a little bit of a monologue here that I think is meant to be inspiring, is meant to take us back to the core of who Superman is. This is supposed to be a statement of some kind about what it truly means to be Superman. He says, "You'll never be Superman because you have no idea what it means to be Superman. It's not about where you were born or what powers you have or what you wear on your chest." And finally knocking him down and standing over Superboy Prime, panting, he says, "It's about what you do. It's about action." And I just don't feel like these lines really have the impact that I would want. Both Bruce and Diana had these kind of coming back to purity moments in this story. And I feel like this would be the moment where we would expect something like that from Superman. And I just don't feel like this moment quite delivers on that. What does he mean it's about action? Anyway, I don't want to read too deep into this philosophically, but I think from a storytelling standpoint, it falls short of really giving me the Superman-defining moment that I would have liked it to be here. Moments later, Kara, the Earth 2 Supergirl, has caught up to her cousin, the Golden Age Superman, and is with him in what ends up being his final moments. And this is really kind of like the true death. They were giving us something that was a parallel to death, a metaphor for death, when he and Lois, quote-unquote, died at the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths. But this is, really his actual death. Lois, in her dying moments, a couple issues back, had been trying to express to Golden Age Superman that this isn't the end, even though she was dying. And G.A. Superman says here, I know what Lois was trying to tell me. I'll always be with you, Kara. Even if you can't see me, I'll always be here. Which is hinting at something. It's that vague sort of language that we often use when we are mourning or recognizing the passing of people that, celebrities maybe that we've heard about, or in other situations where we'll kind of imply that they are always with us. But we never get down to the details of like how that works or what's the basis for believing that that is the case. Likewise, they keep it very vague here. He goes on to say it's not going to end. It's never going to end for us. Then his weak eyes look up, see an unusually shining star in the sky. The final word from his lips is Lois. Then we see the silhouette of his body with Kara crying over him, and in the sky, this faded image of a young-looking Golden Age Superman and a young-looking Golden Age Lois smiling at each other lovingly up in the stars. So emotionally, it's cathartic. Of course, we like this idea of being reunited with our loved ones and this life not being the end. But at some point, as we are all wrestling through these feelings and of grief, of anxiety over death, it's really worthwhile to ask specific questions and look for specific answers that can actually give us substantial hope based on things that are real. Then in the aftermath, we have a few things that are, clearly setting up status quo changes or hinting at where various characters in the DC universe are going as the publishing moves forward. Still no sign of Wally. Bart Allen, aged up to, roughly legal adulthood at least, you would think is going to be the new Flash, but for some reason, they give us a whole scene where he says that he's lost his super speed. He has no super speed anymore, but Jay Garrick, who we last saw was saying that the Speed Force is gone, says that he still has some speed. He says it has nothing to do with the Speed Force. My metahuman gene is active. I'd guess I'd top out at the speed of sound. It's really weird. It kind of echoes where Wally West was after Crisis on Infinite Earths. His top speed at that time was reduced to the speed of sound. And Bart goes on to say, I'm done running. I'm not the new Flash. From here on out, Jay, you're the fastest man alive again. And I actually kind of would have liked that for a time, not with him being limited to the speed of sound, but if memory serves, it was not long at all, maybe immediately after this, that Bart was the Flash of the main Flash comic book series. Anyway, it feels a bit like, on an editorial level, the writer of this story didn't know what the plans were quite for the Flash book. Yeah, it's weird. Anyway, we have one more somewhat unnecessary scene with Alex Luthor, who it turns out did survive and is walking around in some alleys saying, oh, I'll build up my resources again, and I'll do this all over again, and I'm gonna make it all better. But then he's suddenly surprised by an attack from the Joker, who puts like acid on his face, is laughing and attacking him. Lex Luthor walks up on the scene and says, oh, Alex, you made a lot of mistakes. You underestimated Superman, Superboy, me, but the biggest one, you didn't let the Joker play. Because up to this point, the Joker had been noticeably absent from the secret society of supervillains that Alex Luthor had built as the pretend Lex Luthor. Joker points the barrel of a gun at the half-melted face of Alex Luthor. We cut away to a higher shot of the city and just hear blam and then laughter, giving us a more definitive end to Alex Luthor. But maybe most significantly and representative of what would come after this story, we have a scene with Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman all in civilian garb, just kind of walking together and seemingly in a reflective mood. They talk about how they're each going away in different ways. Their plans are for a time to drop away from their activity as heroes. Batman is going to retrace the steps around the globe that he took training to become Batman, but this time he's taking Tim Drake and Dick Grayson along with him, saying, I'm not going alone this time. So again, this significant turning point, this sort of healing for the character of Batman, restoring him to someone who is at least less paranoid and distrustful, and letting people into his life more. Wonder Woman simply says that, I think it's time to find out who Diana is. So evidently going on some kind of a soul-searching journey. Clark, it's unclear in this scene what he's going to do while he's away, or even why he's going away. But Lois meets him there and says, "What are you going to do with all this free time, Mr. Kent?" They embrace, they kiss. He says, "I'm sure I'll figure out something, but until we're back, I'd say things are in good hands." And then we get a massive splash page of all the superheroes that are still going to be around over the course of the next, what would turn out to be a year, at least in comic book chronology, that they would be gone. Right after this, if memory serves, there was a 1-year time jump in every DC book except for one new book called 52, which was published on a weekly basis and told the story of what happened in that year immediately after Infinite Crisis. There is just a little bit of an epilogue on the planet Oa, the headquarters of the Green Lantern Corps, where we find that they have imprisoned Superboy Prime in sort of an artificial red sun inside of a green energy construct vault where he is depowered and presumably unable to escape. He sadistically carves an S in his chest, menacingly looks up, breaking the fourth wall, saying, "I've been in worse places than this, and I've gotten out." And we would, in fact, see Superboy Prime show up again in some significant stories in the future. But that does bring us to the end of Infinite Crisis, which I found to be, from a fan perspective, very gratifying for someone who had really come on board with the DC Universe properly, really investing in it, starting with Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then seeing that being rewarded in this story here, as well as it being a great follow-up response to what have you for the story Identity Crisis. So there's a sense in which we've kind of come full circle with this Essential Issues series at this point. You might be wondering, okay, what story are we going to look at next? Well, we're actually going to take a surprising leap forward in time, mentioning but skipping stories you might have assumed would be included in this series. Next time is going to be a bit different as I give an overview of an enjoyable yet somewhat forgettable period in my history as a DC Comics fan. It will serve, I think, as both an interlude for my Essential Issues series and also an introduction to what will likely be a new format for this series going forward. I've got lots of ideas for the future of my DC comic book related content that I'm excited to start into, and next time will serve as a bridge before getting into, well, to use an appropriately comic booky term, the soft reboot of my Essential Issues series. I hope that you will look forward to that because I certainly am.
Do you like games? I like games. Do you like games too? I like games too.